ESG is about making money. My career that I had is not replicable now. From the time I was little, I was always fascinated with politics, always fascinated with government. I always knew what my career path would be. I got very lucky in terms of my timing. Bill Clinton was going to become president, and I was able to work on that campaign to get there. So it was a really exciting time. You had a young, moderate governor from the South.
Charismatic.
Completely charismatic. I always wanted to work in government, but I always knew where I wanted to go. UPS was going to expand into Asia. They needed somebody to build a team in Asia to do all of that government relations work. The most interesting thing that I worked on was getting UPS the right to fly to China. This was the biggest case literally in the history of aviation, and there's been none since. It was a presidential issue. My boss at the time, he said, you're the quarterback on this team. This is the biggest issue the company is facing right now. And obviously we won. And then they said, okay, time for you to go back to Washington. And I'm like, I don't think so. So I said, thanks, but I'm going to stay. Henry Kravis was coming to Hong Kong, and I was setting up a media roundtable for Henry, who's, this is one of the OGs, right, of private equity. Where KKR had decided that they were going to create public affairs for Asia. And I say, look, I don't know anything about private equity. I barely know anything about financial services. And they said, well, we don't care. So that's how I ended up joining KKR. I'm pretty known in my tiny little narrow circle of being here in Singapore and being an American who's been here for 23 years. I have my own firm and have been doing that for 8 years. I put myself in the right place at the right time. I recognize that. The more unique you are, the more opportunity you get. You've got to take chances. So I would say, bet on.
Steve, good morning. How are you?
Doing great. Great to be with you, Paul.
Man, I admire your energy. I'm someone that's got a lot of energy, but tell the audience what you normally do on a Saturday morning before you roll up to do a podcast with me.
Well, Saturday morning, I wake up early because I do radio every Saturday, and we leave for the studio at 8 in the morning and on from 9:30 to 10. And we choose 4 different stories every week, sometimes up to the last minute. So I have to get up early and prep. Some of them I already know already. Like this week, we talked about the U.S. ambassador from Singapore getting confirmed to be by the Senate. So he'll be on his way here. And so we talked about that. And I had already done that story this week for television. So that one was easy. But then there's others where you really, for me, I have to dig in a bit, like the Gaza peace plan and what that means. And so it's an early morning on Saturdays for me.
Good man. Now, what I want to do is, for the few people that may not know you, if you could give a quick introduction before we roll back the pages and talk about your career history.
I think there's a lot of people who don't know me. I'm pretty known in my tiny little narrow circle of being here in Singapore and being an American who's been here for 23 years and has operated at the intersection of business and government and sustainability and finance. So that's kind of where I am now. I have my own firm and have been doing that for 8 years, and before that worked for other large companies.
So I know you studied in Virginia, but where did you actually grow up in the US?
Well, born in Chicago, high school in New Jersey, college and law school in Virginia, and then in DC before coming to Singapore.
So which place would you call home if you were going back to the US?
Well, I certainly know more people in D.C. I'm more comfortable in D.C., having worked there, and a lot of my college and law school friends are there. I think if we moved back one day, it'd probably be to California, which is where my family is now, my mother and my brother. But really, D.C. is kind of home.
It's funny you mention this, because when I went to D.C., Virginia, and Chicago, all within a few weeks of each other, and I loved all of them, but they're all very different. And I love Charlottesville in particular. So unpack your journey. How did you decide to study law? What was behind that?
Well, literally my whole life, as long as I can remember, and from the time I was little, I was always fascinated with politics, always fascinated with government. From the time I was in first grade to second grade or so. And so that I always knew what my career path would be. And the University of Virginia, founded by Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, and it has a very strong government program, and Charlottesville is a historic place. So I always was attracted to the University of Virginia, always knew I wanted to apply there, always knew I wanted to study government there. And so my career path up to a certain point was pretty, preordained.
Did you know why I'm curious is because I find that most people, when they start on their career journey, it's not a linear space, typically go in different directions. But did you know you wanted to go and work in government versus practice?
I always wanted to work in government. Now, whether you can do it, how you get there, that can be a little bit difficult, especially if you want to be on the political side, which is where I wanted to be. So I got very lucky in terms of my timing of when I graduated from law school and the fact that a Democrat, Bill Clinton, was going to become president, and I was able to work on that campaign to get there. And I graduated 12 years earlier, and we had 12 years of Republicans, which was Reagan, Bush for those 3 terms. I certainly would have had a much different career path. Maybe I would have gone to work on the Hill. Maybe I'd have worked in state politics or government to start. But I always knew where I wanted to go right out of school.
Really? How was it? Tell us. I want to hear about being part of the Clinton administration. It must have been a wild ride.
It was, and certainly it was a very different time than what we have now when we look back. I mean, the United States back then was political, and this was the beginning of the real partisanship was, I would argue, in when Bill Clinton came in and the Democrats and Republicans started to get much more tribal, but it hadn't been yet. So it really was a time where you could get things done working across aisle, but also, Bill Clinton came in and there was so much energy because the Democrats had been out for 12 years. And here you had a young, moderate governor from the South.
Charismatic.
Completely charismatic. So it was a really exciting time. And it was just such a wonderful experience to have been a part of that, really from the beginning of his presidential aspirations.
Yeah, it was an amazing tenure. I'm just curious because I love TV shows, West Wing, all these other shows. Have you watched any of these shows, and what kind of comparisons can you do, like House of Cards?
Yeah, I can only watch them in bits because it's not real. People ask me all the time, is the West Wing real? Is this movie real? Is that movie real? And I'm like, it's a TV show.
Yeah.
It's a movie. That's not what it's like. I think some of the characters of what they're trying to accomplish, who they are, some of that comes through, and there's some great people, and I think most people in politics and in government are in there to do the right thing. You may disagree with what the right thing is from their perspective, but they really are. But there are some, and it's really hard to be a bad person to succeed, because if you're going to succeed in government, you're going to succeed in politics, you have to be likable. People have to want to follow you. You have to be a good person. There are examples where there are not.
Of course.
But it's really minor examples. It certainly used to be minor examples. So that piece of it is real.
Which presidents do you admire the most? Who's the one that you look at and think, I really think they did a great job in office?
Well, I mean, if you do that, you go back to the historical, then you say Washington and Lincoln are the 2 most important. I mean,
in recent times?
Well, I would say in recent times, it was John Kennedy when I was, now he, of course, was assassinated in 1963, and I was born after he was assassinated. But it was that Kennedy, that charisma, that mystique, that, we're going to go to the moon and we're going to have the new frontier, and all of that youth and excitement in what it could mean to be an American, what it meant, ask not what you can do, what you could do for your government, ask not what your government could do for you. Those types of things were so inspiring. So whether he certainly isn't as great a president as a Lincoln or a Washington, but he was inspirational to a lot of people, and including me as a first grader, 10 years after he was no longer president.
He clearly had a resounding impact. When you look at guys like that and yourself, did you feel that you always had a calling to go into politics? Why I'm asking that is because when I speak to young people, they're often confused. What do you do? You're in college, you're in university. What's next? Did you feel you had a calling?
I did, I guess. I don't know. I wouldn't have called it a calling, but it is what I wanted to do. There is no question it's what I wanted to do. When I was in 8th grade, I was interning for my congressman in his district office. When I was in college, I was interning on Capitol Hill, or I had interned for Governor Cuomo. The good Governor Cuomo, not the son, but Governor Mario Cuomo. I interned for him when I was in college. I worked at at Democratic National Convention. So I did all of that. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I loved, and I knew that for me, you could have fun and you could make a difference. And that's when you could do both of those things at the same time. I think that was what turned out to be so attractive to me about being in government.
It's meaningful, it's impactful, right? Well, one of the things I really admire about you is that you had the courage to go into business for yourself. What was that transition like, and where did that process begin and end?
Yeah, it's my goal in life had been to work in government, and I got, again, very lucky in terms of timing, very lucky in terms of really wanting to work for Bill Clinton back when he was governor, and working on that campaign, and then all of a sudden now I'm in government, and it's 1994 in 1993, so I'm 27 years old, and now I've gotten to be what I'd always wanted to do. And so I served for 5 years briefly in the White House, and then at the Department of Transportation. And then the question is, okay, what do you do next? Because I hadn't thought of the next. I thought I'd be in government. It would take me a while to get in, or I'd be in for a long time. And the administration ends, and when you're a political appointee, your time ends. And so I had no idea what I was going to do next. And United Parcel Service, UPS, came to me towards the end of the administration.
Oh, they approached you?
They approached me,
Cool.
And they said, would you lead our international aviation negotiating team in Washington? And I said, well, I really don't know anything about that. I mean, I've been on the sidelines of a couple of negotiations, but I wasn't a negotiator. And they said, well, look, this is, we don't care about that. You know how government thinks. And that's what we need, because UPS then didn't hire people from the outside. It was all people were internal, and it was all promote from within. And they were recognizing, as they were a global company, they needed to bring in people from government. So they were hiring trade experts from government. They were hiring Hill staff from government. And I was the person they hired from government, from the Department of Transportation, who knew how DOT thought and operated and would do an aviation negotiation. So that's how I ended up at UPS, and then eventually led me to be here years and years later.
Yeah, I want to unpack the journey. So going from public to private, what was that transition like? Because different leadership styles, different ways of working.
Yeah, it was. In some ways, because I was in government, that prepared me for the private sector. And now, in other ways, having been in the private sector first, like I worked in a law firm for 2 years, not really, the private sector, and certainly not as a first and second year associate. But had I been in the private sector first, I would have done things much differently in government.
I'm just curious.
And because in government, you don't there's no real time pressure on you, right? It's you take your time, you make the decision, you can put things off, you can talk about it, forever, unless there's some real action-forcing event. And there's not a lot of action-forcing events. They do occur, but they're not there all the time. Whereas you're in the private sector, you have to make money. Yeah. You have to, if you want to expand into a new market, you want to, buy a competitor, whatever it is, you need to make that decision, and you need certainty. And government doesn't need that. Government operates on a completely different level. And so it's important for business to know how government thinks, and it's important for government to know what business realities are. Yeah. And that lacks both ways. And so what I've done to some degree for my career since then is to be able to be that bridge to explain to business how government thinks, and then to explain to government what business needs and how they can work together.
Yeah, I think that unique position will probably go a long way. So did UPS bring you to Singapore?
Yeah, no. So when I left, so I'm in government. UPS comes to me and says, will you run our international aviation negotiating team out of Washington? And I said, well, I really don't know how to do that. And they said, don't worry about it. You know how government thinks. That's what we need. So then I went to UPS, and I did that in the UPS Washington office for about 3 years. And then they came to me and they said, we want you to move to Singapore to build and lead public affairs for UPS in Asia. I said, well, I really don't know Asia. I mean, I've been like once or twice. And
what does that mean, by the way, when they say public affairs? Because when you think about UPS doing the sophisticated things, it wouldn't spring to mind, right? Yeah. What does that mean?
Well, I'll give you that in a second. So they came and said, we want you to build and lead public affairs for UPS in Asia. And I said, well, I really don't know Asia. And they said, don't worry about it. You know UPS, you know public affairs. Yeah. We'll teach you Asia. I don't think that would work today. I think 23 years later, they would want somebody with Asia experience to come out here. But that's not what it was like 23 years ago in the old days of the expat era. So what does public affairs mean, and what does it mean for UPS? I mean, for a company like UPS, it is extraordinarily regulated by the government. And if you just look at it, as an airline, it is regulated by the FAA for safety. It's regulated by the Office of the Secretary in Washington, and other agencies of whether, and foreign governments, can you fly here or not fly here? Yeah. How often can you fly? If you can fly here from the U.S., can you go somewhere else? So you have all of the government really controlling, in a lot of ways, how UPS can operate as an airline. How do you, customs, a huge issue. Security, a huge issue. Tariffs, a huge issue. So a postal competition, because UPS's competitors in many ways are the national postal services. So you need somebody who can really understand how government works. What is it that you want to do as UPS? If you want to expand into a new market, you need government approval. If you want to change a service, you need government approval. If you want to compete on a level playing field with a foreign postal operator or a foreign company, you need to make sure the government gives you that level playing field. So UPS, and because UPS grew up, right, over 100 years ago now, of course, but UPS grew up in the United States competing with the post office in many ways. It really got public affairs earlier than I think almost any company in the world. Now everybody gets the importance of having a public affairs, a government relations team, but UPS got it first. And they were and are great at it. And I was lucky enough to be with them for quite some time to learn how to do public affairs from UPS. And so they sent me here because as UPS was going to expand into Asia in a very significant way, starting in the early 2000s, they needed somebody to build a team in Asia to do all of that government relations work.
I'll tell you a very funny story. So, because you joined them in Singapore in 03?
I came here in 03, joined them in DC in 99, and came here in 03. Yeah.
So I arrived in Singapore in 01, and I was told, Paul, I was 22, you're going to work on the legal desk. And I started making some inquiries and found out that there was an in-house counsel group of all lawyers in-house that would meet. And I self-invited myself, and I was told by the guy that was running the groups, look, Paul, I appreciate your courage, but you need to get the hell out of here. And I said, well, look, let me give out my 250 name cards. And he goes, well, you can't do that. I said, well, can you give me the list of all the attendees and I'll get out of here? I was 22, right? Yeah. And then we shook hands and I said, look, I'd love to buy you a beer one day. So I dropped him an email, and he was the general counsel for FedEx. And he introduced me to UPS, which became my first client. And I told you, they were looking for a tax accountant who was legally qualified. And at 22, I didn't know anything. And it's not like the internet now.
Right.
And then I found someone that had accounting and legal qualifications, but it was a major setup then. So then were you looking after the region at multiple locations? Yeah, no.
So it was all those jobs, the regional public affairs. So it's all of Asia, and obviously you're responsible, but you work with the country teams because they're very involved with the local governments, especially as a regulated an entity is UPS. And then one of the things my first task when I was sent here was go build a public affairs team in China. So I hired two people in China to work for UPS China public affairs, and then built the team further from there, but started with China in 03.
I mean, you and I know this, but having been in Asia for so many years, it's crazy when we look at the growth. Like when you mention China and Singapore, it's there, unrecognizable vis-a-vis when we first came out to Asia, right?
Yeah. Totally.
So then what was the journey? Did you move to KKR straight away after that?
So I was at UPS, and UPS is back then, maybe a little less now, but back then kind of like the military, right? It was, when I joined, it was still a privately held company. Yeah. It went public soon after I joined, but it kept a lot of that DNA, was that you joined UPS for life, you were going to be well taken care of, and you would move where they told you to move. And I was supposed to be here for 5 years, and that becomes 6 years, and that becomes 7 years, and then they said, okay, time for you to go back to Washington. And I was kind of like, okay, what am I going to do? And they're like, well, we'll figure it out when you get there. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I mean, I like what I'm doing here. I love being in Singapore. I love seeing the growth. And I'm not just going to go back to Washington to do but I don't know what I'm going to even do. So I said, thanks, but I'm going to stay. So decided to stay in Singapore, and then had to look for a job, and fortunately, pretty good timing, where KKR had decided that they were going to create public affairs, so the global investment firm, they were going to create public affairs for Asia, and so as I'm interviewing them, I say, look, I don't know anything about private equity, I barely know anything about financial services, and they said, well, we don't care, you know Asia, you know public affairs, we'll teach you private equity. So that's how I ended up joining KKR.
You know what? Your transparency and honesty, but it worked for you, right? Because a lot of people don't. If they're uncomfortable, they'll probably give an answer and try and BS their way around it. But do you find that's always worked for you?
Yeah, look, and my career advice, and I speak to a fair amount of colleges and universities, or people who just seek me out randomly. And looking back at my career, my advice is make yourself unique.
Yeah.
The more unique you are, the more opportunity you get. And so, KKR, when they were hiring, they needed somebody who had my skill set. And it's much easier for me, it wasn't easy, but much easier for me to learn private equity than take a private equity person and teach them about public affairs.
Yeah.
You're saying for UPS, where you can't take somebody and teach them how government thinks. You can read all the books that you want, but unless you're really in government and knowing how it works and thinks to be able to navigate it, that's the skill set you need. So the more unique you are and the more you play to your strengths, the more opportunity you get in areas you don't even think it may be applicable to you.
Did you know much about KKR before you joined them, and what an outstanding firm they are?
No, I did. I didn't know, really.
Ignorance can be bliss, right?
I didn't know much about private equity. Obviously, I read Barbarians at the Gate when I was starting to interview with them. A famous book about a takeover of RJR Nabisco that KKR eventually won, and it's a fascinating book. I highly recommend it. And so that was, I knew that. And then when I started to interview, I was like, these are some of the smartest and nicest people that you're going to find, which is very surprising to me because, you're thinking private equity and this is all very cutthroat. But it's similar in a way to government, because private equity then, I think it's changed now, but private equity then is you needed to convince a company to let the private equity firm buy you outright or buy a part of you. And you better be a nice person. You could be a very tough person, but you better be nice and fair if you're going to be able to work to give up your company to them. Yeah. And so that's something that really stood out to me as I was going through my 23 interviews. I think I had 23 interviews.
Only
it might
23.
Might have been more. Because back then this was still very much a private equity firm. It's not anymore. It's a huge global investment firm. But it was really, they wanted to make sure if you were going to come in that you were going to fit and that it's something you really, really wanted to do. And so it was a very intense, the most intense interview process.
Was that over, 2-3 months?
Oh, more, I think a little bit more than that, probably 4 or 5. And the reason I got through in 4 or 5 months is because now I had left UPS, I had no job, but I had a competing offer for a global firm, not a financial services or private equity. And I said to them, look, I want to work for KKR. I want to work with you, but I cannot afford to, wait for you, say no to this. And if you say no, I'm really out of luck. Yeah. And so that forced the interview process to take only 5 months.
Yeah. Not too bad.
Yeah.
And then tell us about that journey, because, you've now gone from office, UPS, financial services, private equity. So now your breadth of knowledge has just exploded, right?
Yeah. So when I interviewed with KKR and, they said, okay, you're going to be in charge of public affairs. Now, public affairs by definition at UPS is, 90% back then, 90% government relations, public policy. A little bit of comms as it would relate to government relations, public policy, and a little bit of CSR as we would use that philanthropic aspect of CSR in working with governments. And then we would never call it sustainability, but a little bit of sustainability back then. We didn't know what the word meant. Really, you didn't use it back then. But that was UPS. It was really a government relations, public policy job. When I got the job with KKR, And I said, okay, what's public affairs? And they said, well, 1/3 is government relations, public policy. 1/3 is comms, and 1/3 is ESG. To which my question was, what is ESG? Because I had never heard of ESG before, and this is in 2010, early 2011, and I'm going to be in charge of something I'd never heard of in my life, so I had to Google it to figure out what it was. And I was, in hindsight, not in hindsight, but I'm almost positive I was the first global private equity person to do ESG in Asia. And that, not my foresight at all, but KKR's foresight of where the world was going and how it had to get in front. And then the thing about KKR, well, the UPS and KKR had the same geographic remit, basically a triangle from Tokyo to Christchurch to Mumbai and everything in between.
Wow.
But UPS was, aviation, transportation, logistics, postal, whereas KKR was everything. Because KKR could invest in any sector. It could be a pharmaceutical investment, and at the same time, it's doing logistics, and it could be doing offshore helicopter services, and it could be doing, bubble tea, or it could be doing coffee. It could be doing anything.
Yeah.
And so it was it was the broadest job you could possibly.
But
have.
amazing, right? And so interesting. And then what was your KPI? What were you tasked to do over the were you with them for 5-6 years?
7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
So what were you tasked to do as it evolved? Because I'm sure it did so.
No, everything. I mean, that's what it was a great job, but in hindsight, it was an intense job. You don't realize it while you're in the moment. But no, I mean, it could be everything. So it could be, we have a company we're invested in Taiwan, and we want to do a public to private, take a publicly traded company and take it private. And you need, so that's a really serious government relations, public policy job that has a communications piece to it. But at the same time, you could have an NGO protesting one company in a different part of the world. So now you're working on that, and now you've got a deal coming, and you have to figure out, okay, what are the ESG material factors for a Chinese dairy? So you might be working on that. Now you've got a communications issue with a mining logistics company in Australia. That could literally be 1 week. I mean, so
wow.
That could be, you have no idea what's coming on any given day.
But what I'm curious about is, because it's happening so quickly, have you got to sit down and design this? Okay, so I'm going to contact these guys from this government office in Taiwan or Taipei or wherever it is, and work out how I'm going to handle this conversation without stepping on any toes. Because you talk about it like it's easy, but the reality is there's a lot of finesse and nuance, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, a couple different things. So for any like that type of issue, so a public affairs issue, and this is what I was taught at UPS, you always got to figure out what are the 4 Ps of that public affairs issue, right? So what is the policy aim you're trying to address? What are the politics around that policy aim? Because odds are there's going to be somebody opposing you, and there could be others who may support you. So you have to do all that stakeholder mapping around the politics. And then what is the public interest that you're advocating as defined by who you're advocating it to? It's not what I think is in the public interest of Taiwan. It's what is the Taiwanese regulator think is in the public interest of Taiwan, because you have to show him that what you're asking for is in his interest. He knows it's in my interest. The question is, and then the 4th P is people. You need to get the right people involved. So I am not often going to be the right person who's going to do this. So who is going to be the right person? Could it be the company that we're working with? Could it be a KKR person in Taiwan? Could it be a lobbyist that we have to hire? Could it be a consumer group? Could it be a university? I mean, there's a very wide range of who is going to be doing it. It is often not going to be me who's going to be doing it, but it's going to be somebody else who's going to be doing it. So you have to think of 4 Ps for every single issue that you're going to have a government advocacy on. And that's, I learned that at UPS, and when I teach, public affairs every once in a while, I always talk about, you got to know the 4 Ps.
I love that. I'm fascinated by it. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because a lot of people are worried about pivoting and changing their career, and you've had the courage to do it, multiple times. And I know it was not always by design. So when Clinton left office, it forced that change. But what's the thought process in that moment? Are you asking yourself what's important to you, what your ambitions are? I'm just curious what was going through your mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think part of it is What is it that you want to do? Where is your passion? If you want to add a fifth P, where is your passion that you're going to really want to do something every single day, that you're going to want to get up and maybe not every day be excited, but be excited more often than not about waking up in the morning and going to work. And then understanding, and I think most people undersell themselves. What is your value? What is it that you have that the company needs? You obviously the company has something that you want, but what is your value? And understand what your value is, and bet on yourself.
Yeah.
Make that bet on yourself that you're going to be successful. And most people, well, at least I think a lot of people are afraid to bet on themselves. They're worried that if they give something up, they won't be able to get something new. And I think that people don't have enough confidence in themselves that they should.
That's a great bit of insight, because I think a lot of people get to that tipping point and they realize, and the challenge is, if you're in an organization, there's always someone next to you, underneath you, that's going to, bite the bullet and go for it, and they end up being your boss.
Yeah.
Without talking about anything sensitive, what was perhaps the most interesting project that you worked on at KKR, and the most complex?
I mean, I always going to say, I want to go back to UPS, because probably the most interesting thing that I worked on, one of the interesting things I really worked on was getting UPS the right to fly to China.
Okay.
Because at that point, there were 3 U.S. airlines that had the right to fly to China, and 3 Chinese airlines that had the right to fly to the U.S. And the U.S. and China had negotiated an agreement that a 4th airline would be permitted by both. And so this was the biggest case literally in the history of aviation, at least going back for a few decades now, because it was the first time that a passenger airline and a cargo airline were battling with one another to get a single designation. Yeah. And this is when China was just starting to take off. So this is 1999, 2000. And so it was the biggest aviation case in years and years in Washington, and there's been none since. It was a presidential issue because it was the biggest thing going between multiple companies. UPS cared, FedEx cared, because FedEx didn't want us to win.
Yeah.
Delta wanted to win, American wanted to win, United and Northwest didn't want them to win, and so it was massive. And I was sitting, really at the very core of it. Yeah. And as my boss at the time, he said, you're the quarterback on this team.
Yeah.
And he said,
no pressure.
he said, there was a lot of pressure, but he said, I'm only going to be mad at you if you tell me one thing. He said, if we lose this thing and you come to me and said, well, if we had just done this, we might have won. He goes, you ask me for anything, you're going to get it. You tell me why you want it, and you're going to get it. Wow. Because this is the biggest issue the company is facing right now. And we had, every UPSer was working on this, literally around hundreds of thousands of people working for UPS were writing letters to their member of Congress saying UPS needs to get this access. I mean, it was just
huge.
It was huge, and it was all out, and obviously we won. And so that was one that I'll never forget. And I'll give you one from my government days that I'll never ever forget. Was there had been a series of airline crashes in the U.S. Starting in really in the 90s. You had TWA 800, you had a Value Jet crash, you had a U.S. Air crash, you had an American Eagle crash, and the way the families of the victims of the aviation disasters were being treated was falling through the cracks. Mm-hmm. And no one was taking ownership of this. The airlines were saying, we don't want to do anything that could get us in trouble legally. And the government was saying, well, we don't have any role in this. And, the Red Cross would say, well, we're there to help, but we don't have any power. And so they really were not being treated well. And Congress passed a law that said that the Department of Transportation and the National Transportation Safety Board had to devise a way to ensure the fair treatment of the families of the victims of aviation disasters. And no one wanted to touch this thing because it's not really, a sexy project, and you're dealing with very serious issues, and there's not a lot of upside, people didn't think, to it. So I went to my boss, the general counsel, and the secretary. I said, I will run this thing. this task force, but I want to run it. I mean, I'll do it, but I want to run it. And they said, great, you do it. And so I did it. I was the co-chair with or co-executive director with the National Transportation Safety Board chief of staff, and we did this. And it really turned out as well as you could have imagined, because we brought everybody together. So we had the families of the victims of aviation disasters on the task force. We had the airlines on the task force. We had the pilots union. We had the flight attendants union. We had people who had been in media and were now in professors to talk about what's the role of the media. We had the Justice Department, the FAA, the State Department. We brought everybody together. And the one story I tell from this that really broke the ice, and because the airlines and the families were kind of like not trusting of one another. And what would happen, and we brought in a psychologist who had worked with Attorney General Janet Reno, and she came in to explain the situation. And when this is the old days, right? There's no internet. And in the old days, when there'd be a plane crash, a wife, it was typically a wife because the husband would be flying, right? Yeah. The wife would call the airline and would say, okay, there was a plane that took off from Chicago to Pittsburgh. It crashed. Was my husband on that plane? Here's his name. And the airline would say, we can't give you that information. And the wife would say, well, I know he was flying home, but sometimes he took the 12 o'clock, sometimes he took the 3 o'clock, sometimes he took the 6 o'clock. So I don't know what flight he was on. What flight was he on? And the airline would say, we can't give you that information. And it caused great stress with the wife. And the airline thought it was doing the right thing, because the airline was like, well, what if we tell her he's on the plane and he wasn't? Or what if we tell her he wasn't on the plane, but he was? We're going to make the situation worse. So the airline thought by withholding information, it was doing the right thing. And the psychologist from the Justice Department came in and said, look, humans crave information. Humans just, and especially at a time of great stress like that, need information, and they can understand the context of the information which you give them. So what the airline should be doing is saying, Judy, we don't know if your husband was on the plane. We know he had a reservation for that flight, but we don't know if he was on the plane. And Judy was like, that's all I wanted to hear. Yeah. And so then that changed everything. So Judy recognized the airlines weren't trying to be harmful to her, and the airlines realized they weren't doing the right thing, and it just completely changed. And from that moment on, every recommendation we came out with was unanimous, and to this day is being adopted. And you can see plane crashes now where one of the things that changed, again, plane crashes are pretty gruesome, and I unfortunately, went to a couple sites, and it takes a long time to identify the bodies to confirm, because there's not much, if anything, left. It's horrific. And so you don't get the insurance doesn't pay off until there's a confirmation, and it could take weeks, because you have to have DNA testing. Maybe it goes a little bit faster now, but then it take weeks, months before you get that confirmation, you get the insurance payout. And if it's the sole breadwinner on that flight, you're not paying the mortgage, your bills are getting delayed. And the airlines would say, well, if we gave the money, it's an admission of our guilt. Now, we don't know. Were we at fault? Was it pilot error, or was it Boeing's fault? Or was it Rolls-Royce's or GE's fault? Or was it the government's fault? Or was the plane shot down from a terrorist attack? And if we give the money, then that is an admission, so we don't want to give the money. And we brought lawyers together and said, okay, airlines, here's what you should do. Just say, here's a check for $10,000 or $25,000 to get you through. If you get insurance settlement from this, you pay us back. So it's an interest-free loan. Now, brilliant. And that's what they do now. And that was a recommendation that came out of our task force in, I think it was 1997. And so we made such a difference. And this is why I loved working in government. You could really make a difference in people's lives and in lots of people's lives for years and years and years. And so I would say the China case, in one way, working for UPS will stay with me forever. And being on this task force and seeing it all come together will stay with me forever. That's huge.
I think some of what that psychologist did to help you guys, so simple but profound.
And this is what we knew. We didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
And everybody thought they were doing the right thing, but go find the experts, right?
Yeah.
Go find the people
Yeah.
who have that different point of view, who have, who have the training, the study, the life experience, whatever it may be. And broadening that out is what makes you successful.
Well, it's when my dad died, the hospital called. I'd just gone back to Ireland. We knew he wasn't well. And they said, look, you really need to come and see him. And I was just with him 2 hours ago.
Mm-hmm.
And no, we think you need to come. And I had just got off the flight. So my mum and my brother went. And it turns out he'd already passed away. But they don't want to tell you that because they know you're going to drive erratically and what have you. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Going back to that China deal, because in living memory, I know just how complex, liaisons were back then. What were the 3 takeaways? What were the 3 keys to victory to getting that deal across the line?
Yeah, I think one was you really need to make the economic case, and you really need to show what is the financial benefit to the country, because here, right, the United States government is making the decision, and the decision is what is the economic impact that is going to be greatest to the United States. And you need to make a very strong economic argument. And the soundbite I did not come up with, our head of PR came up with was it was business over tourism. Because their soundbite, which they didn't have, but basically was people over packages. They're like, it's more important to be doing the people-to-people exchanges. Therefore, the passenger flights are more important, and you should give it to American or Delta, not give it to not give it to UPS. And our argument was business over tourism. Yeah, it's nice to have people going back and forth, but what really drives the economy is cargo. It's packages. It's express delivery. And so we showed how much value there was in a UPS flight. And we showed that for every 40 daily international packages that would come from China to the US, that would lead to another UPS job, which was likely to be a Teamsters job. And so we then had the political come into this as well, because I said one of the things when I was coming up with the strategy, I said, I want to get the Teamsters to be a party to our case. Yeah. And the Teamsters had never been a party. Airlines, the pilots' unions, flight attendants' unions. By the way, you've got to
explain to the Singaporean audience that are listening, because unions are not a thing here, right? So,
well, they are kind of, right?
But not like in the US with Teamsters,
right? But so the Teamsters are one of the largest unions in the United States, and they are very politically important to.
They can make or break your campaign.
And back then, and even to this day, do the Teamsters, there's a battle. Do they support Trump or do they support Harris? And so what we wanted to say was we wanted to get the Teamsters to support UPS, and that would matter to the government. Now, it's not supposed to matter to the government, right? But because politics isn't supposed to matter in a root case like this, but we knew you want to play that just in case it might. And what was really odd here is that the Teamsters and the labor unions in particular were very anti-China. They were like, we're going to lose all of our jobs to China. And to have the Teamsters say, we support UPS getting the right to fly to China was a really big deal from a political perspective. And I think from an economic perspective too. And that caught, I know it caught the attention, of the White House and of the Gore campaign. And so that was one of the things that we did to make both the economic case, which I thought we had the strongest economic case. I thought we had the strongest political case, in part because of the Teamsters, in part because we had those hundreds of thousands of employees handwriting letters to their members of Congress.
So keys to victory: the economics, the commercials, the politics.
In that case, it was both of those things, and you really had to prove it. Well, no, I think it was remember I say what is the public interest? What's the policy? What's the politics behind it? And so, you get the politics at the state level, you get the politics at the federal level, you get governors running in, you run a PR campaign.
Complex.
It was complex.
Which was the bigger competitor? Was it the commercial airlines or the other carriers like FedEx?
No. FedEx had the right. So FedEx was doing everything to block us because FedEx didn't want the competition.
Of course.
Right? And the same as, United, which was on our side because United didn't want the competition either. So you had, in a way, they were kind of a wash, and which is what you need, right? And so what we wanted to do as best we could was make sure that the politics were neutral, and because we did believe, and I think we proved that we should win on the economic merits. So, but you have to play. If you don't play the political game and your opponent does, you're in trouble. So we had to get the politics at least be a wash, and if not outright win it to win. But you had to win on the economics.
Did you think Al Gore was going to win?
I did. I thought it was going to be close. And frankly, he probably did win.
With the recount.
Looking at what happened in Florida, I was working on. So I took holiday. Remember, I had left the Clinton administration, and I took holiday from UPS to work on the Gore campaign for a couple weeks. So I'm in Arkansas, a state we did not win. But I was in Arkansas working on the campaign. And as the results were coming in that night, we're all talking to one another. And a friend in Florida, which we lost by 500 whatever votes, but a friend in Florida was like, no, we won. We know where the votes are coming in. We know what the vote should be. Don't worry about it. We're going to win this thing. And that's when the butterfly ballot was there and people were putting in Nader instead of Gore, and all of those things came together. So I thought we were going to win until election night. Now, once we got into the recount, I thought we were going to lose because I didn't think the court would side with us once Bush was ahead.
Did you grow up watching things like Robert Redford, All the President's Men? Because when I watched all those movies, they just inspired me. So when you're talking about this, having not been there, that's what I've got in my mind.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, it's a movie. It's a movie. But All the President's Men is a great movie, and it tells the story. I mean, that's a real life story. It tells very accurately.
It's interesting. Like Robert Redford's one of my favorite actors. He's just passed away, but unknowingly, that man has shaped part of my life because. I went to Kenya last year because of the movie Out of Africa, which I fell in love with. He directed A River Runs Through It. I fell in love with fly fishing. The first time I went, I was lucky enough to go to Montana where that was filmed. What a brilliant actor. So let's go back to KKR.
Yeah.
When you were coming to the end of your journey, why? And then what was the next step?
Yeah, I had 14 years of regional public affairs at that time, almost 7 at KKR. I had planned on being there for 5, and everything was structured to be 5. So it went a little bit beyond that and said, okay, time for something new. And I wanted to I was going to do one of two things. I either wanted a global role, which I was interviewing with a commodities firm out of Switzerland. That ended up not happening, and that's a longer story. And then was either going to do that, but wanted to stay in Singapore if I wasn't going to get that global role because of where the boys were in their education and where I was in my career. So I said I was going to do something entrepreneurial and take this platform approach to my career if I wasn't going to take that global role approach. So I created APAC Advisors, and it was always going to be really just me. It's not anymore, but it was going to be just me.
But slow that down a bit, because that to me is fascinating, because I went into business 19.5 years ago. So that whole process, how long was that decision making, the thought process? And who were you seeking counsel from? Was it your wife? Who was in your corner?
Yeah, I would say it was from a family perspective. They're like, you're going to be fine. We'll be fine. We trust you. You do what you need to do. So
that's helpful, but it's not sometimes, because sometimes you're thinking, should I do this? This is completely different. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just jumped in. What did you do?
I think I said, look, what can I do to stay here? I obviously was talking to people to figure out if this was going to work or not. And because of my uniqueness, I think I'm more unique now, having been here 23 years. Back then I was here for about 15 years, and that I had that uniqueness. I was the first person to have done, ESG private equity in Asia. I had that U.S. government experience. I had that public affairs experience. So I knew there were things
you backed
that I
yourself.
could do. Yeah, and it was a relatively low risk from a financial perspective strategy. I didn't have to spend any money basically.
Yeah.
You creating this. You're Singapore. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
To create a legal entity. And so what I was trying to think through. Should I focus on government relations and public affairs? Should I focus on ESG and private equity? And I was talking to people, and there was the founder of a global geostrategic consultancy in Washington, McClarty Associates, and Nelson Cunningham, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of that. So I called him for advice. I knew him from my Clinton days, and had always kept in touch with him and had done some work with him both at UPS and KKR. Said, Nelson, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? He said, well, just come work with us. I'm like, oh, okay, that's easy. Yeah. So now I have one anchor client, right? I got the anchor client there on the government affairs side. What was then called the Emerging Market Private Equity Association, now the Global Private Capital Association, said, we want you to help us get established in the region and, become our senior advisor. So now I got a second client. So now I haven't even started. Yeah. I know I've got McClarty. I can work with them, who I very highly respect.
Great runway. Yeah.
Great runway. And so I could build off of that, having those anchors. And decided to do that.
Can we touch upon this? Because one of the things that people may not be so aware of when you're going into your own business, you get paid for your advice, but you got to get the work, and getting the work's not always easy. And you have to put that sales hat on, initially to develop that work. What did that look like for you? Because you already had a large Rolodex, but I'm sure you still had to pick up the phone and meet new people.
Yes and no. I mean, I did, but a lot of it, I do a lot of speaking. I go to a lot of events.
You've got a huge network.
But chair of AmCham in Singapore, chair of the American Association or the AmChams of Asia Pacific, working now with the American Association of the Indo-Pacific, the work I do at the Global Private Capital Association. I don't have any issue meeting people. I mean, that is not a problem. So, I'm just always meeting people. Yeah, here's what I do. And they're like, we'd like to talk to you. And now I'm at the stage that, more people reach out to me than vice versa, which is a good place, of course, to be. So I never thought of it as I need a business development strategy. It's kind of part of what I do in terms of my networking.
Yeah, it's organic.
Yeah.
Before we talk more about your career, one thing I wanted to ask you about was health and fitness and your energy level. Because, as I said, when we first met, you've got that energy, and I'm someone that resonates with that. But walk us through, your health routine, and how you balance everything.
I don't balance anything.
You're an extremist, right?
No, I mean, this is always on. I've always had a high energy. Always have had a high energy level, and it hasn't. As I get old now, it hasn't diminished yet. So that's just part of who I am, and I think it is because I've loved every job that I've ever had, and I think that's a big part of it.
It's huge.
Yeah. And so wanting to do what I do, excited to do what I do always, again, sometimes more than others, but always excited and loved what I've done and respected where I was and was proud to say, here's what I do. So I think that's part of it. And yeah, I like working out. I like going to the gym every other day. I still play softball. I'm, far and away the oldest person out there now, and but can still run around the outfield. So it's eat, relatively well. Paige kind of makes sure of that. And, don't smoke, drink probably a little bit more than I should, but that's fine.
Amen, brother.
Yeah.
No, I love it. I think but it's something that people don't talk enough about because, when I look at my dad, naturally he was a great sportsman, but, men of that generation, they drank, he used to smoke, he stopped smoking, and they don't exercise. And I think, it's a big part of who I am anyway. If I don't exercise, I don't feel good. I'm not on. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Let's talk about giving advice to CEOs about ESG and sustainability and how to balance, what the business is really trying to do and what it should be perceived as doing.
Yeah, look, it's easy in a way, and ESG is really misunderstood more now than I think ever. ESG is about making money. That's it. And when I go to a CEO or I go to a private equity firm or a deal team or whatever it is, I just say, look, this is really simple. I'm here to help you make money.
Yeah.
And if I can't do that, why are you hiring me?
Yeah.
And
I love it.
That's it. And now you have to be able to explain why it's about making money and how you make money off it. And then that you go off of there. But that is your starting point. And and I think people conflate and think differently about CSR in ESG, right? So CSR is corporate social responsibility. And that is what you do as a good corporate citizen. It is philanthropic in nature. It's what you do, if you're a person and, you spend time with your church or your temple, or you volunteer at a school, or you work for the PTA, you go on cleanups at beaches, whatever it is, that's what you do as a person. And businesses should do the same as well. But that's not how they make money at its core. ESG is how you make money. How do you operate as a business that has a material impact on the environment, that has a material impact, and material is a key word, on your workers, on your customers, on how you interact with the government, that impacts your bottom line, either because it's risk mitigation or value creation, but it's about making money or about not losing money. And that's what ESG is. And so if you go in and you say to a CEO, I'm here to help you make money, they're going to say, tell me how.
Yeah.
If you go to a CEO and I'm here to make you more sustainable, they'll be like, well, go talk to somebody else.
Yeah.
It's about making money. And if you can do that, then you get your in. Now you better be able to prove it, right?
Yeah.
But that's how you get your in.
I love that. What are give us a couple of examples how companies can make money through ESG?
We do diversity, which of course is a negative word in the U.S., certainly with Trump and others right now. But I would say, look, what % of your customers are women, or what % of your customers are women making the decision of whether to buy your product or service? Now, if you say 60%, and then I say, okay, how many of your senior management are women? And you say, well, 20%. I'm like, okay, does it make sense that 20% of the people who are in your senior management are women, but 60% are buying? Wouldn't it make more sense that you would have more people who are women to think about how women are making decisions on how to buy? And they would say, oh yeah, no, that does make sense. So it's not going, you need a quota. It's not saying, well, every company should have X number of women and therefore it's a hard quota or anything like that. You would say, every company should reflect, its management should reflect its customer base. I mean, when you take that approach, then people start thinking about it differently. And they'll say, well, do we have the right management team that is for our customer base? Now, the answer might be yes, but now you're thinking about it very differently. And so you could talk about that. You could talk about, employee engagement. So I say, what % of your employees are, think that they're proud to work here? And if you say, well, I don't know, then I say, well, if you knew the answer to that question, then you would know you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, because the higher employee engagement rate you have, the less churn you have, the less money you spend on recruiting, the less money you spend on training new employees, the more productive an employee is. So so even on like those soft S issues, it's about making money, selling better to your customers, having employees that you don't have a high churn. All of those would just be two easy examples.
The thing is, the biggest dichotomy in business is that most CEOs, I feel, that are in the job today probably won't be in the job 5 years from now. They're up for re-election every year. And I think that what you're saying is so impactful, short, medium, and long term. But the problem is, and it's not their fault, most CEOs aren't really thinking long term. They've got to put runs on the board to look good today. So what advice would you have for a new emerging CEO that hasn't been one before? Because we're seeing a lot. We're seeing a lot of people coming through, being put into CEO roles. It's their first time driving a car that big or a vehicle that big. Metaphorically speaking, what would your advice be to them on day one, pretty much when they're thinking about ESG and making money from this?
No, I mean, I think to say that ESG is about making money. You've got to understand how your business operates from a material perspective. So material meaning what is going to move the bottom line or not. So it's not just, and don't treat this any differently than you treat anything else. I mean, if you went to your CFO and said, what's your projection for next year on revenue? And your CFO said, well, we're going to raise it. We're going to make more money next year. You say to your CFO, what do you know? That's not an answer. How are we going to do it? How much? What's the CapEx going to be? It's how many more people, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't, and so if you say to your chief safety officer or whatever, you say, what's our plan for safety? Oh, we're going to be safe for next year. Well, that's just as ridiculous as the CFO saying we're going to make more money.
Yeah.
How are you going to do it? Why are you going to do it? So I would say take that ESG mindset, and it's going to be the same mindset as you have to material business perspectives. And I would say the other thing that I try and tell CEOs, I have a chart that I use with them, is that we think of the actions we take are the exact opposite of what we should. What you want to do if you're a CEO is you want to spend as little money as possible to have the greatest impact to prevent something from happening. But what CEOs and companies often do is spend the most amount of money to have the least impact. And why do they do that? It's because they ignore issues that are coming up that might be a blip on a radar screen, and they don't have the radar screen on, or they don't even have a radar screen, or they don't have the right things in place, like taking employee complaints, having a whistleblower line, listening to your customers. So all of these little indicators that if they paid attention to and they could fix a problem before it becomes a problem, then they would spend the least amount of money and have the greatest impact. They don't do that. They wait until the problem erupts. And what happens when you have a bet the company issue? Okay, hire the law firms, hire the crisis comms firms, hire the lobbying firms, do everything we can to fix this problem. Now it's really expensive, and it may not be too late, but your impact is going to be a lot less.
Talking about having a whistleblower line, do many companies even have that?
Well, I mean, some do, right? And
after this whole Snowden thing, you'd think that you'd have that, right? That red telephone in the HR department or something.
And they may have it, but they don't listen to it, or they don't publicize it. So they have a whistleblower line, and when if I'm doing due diligence, or I'm having somebody do due diligence on a company, or you're in the investment phase and you're doing an audit and you want to see how they're doing, and you say, okay, do you have a whistleblower, line, your phone, email, whatever it may be? And they say, yes. And you say, well, how many complaints do you have? And they say none. I said, well, okay, that's wrong. You have to be having complaints. So you're either not publicizing it, or you're getting complaints and you're not telling me, because people complain about everything. I mean, a lot of the complaints might be, oh, the water doesn't work in the shower. Okay, that's fine. Go fix it. It's too hot. It's not, it is only cold. The food in the cafeteria is no good. You're going to be getting complaints, but you want to know if you're getting the real complaints. And if somebody's telling you they get none, then you know there's something wrong.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Geopolitically, what are some of the key things that you think CEOs need to be thinking about right now if they're based in Asia? Right, because there's so much turbulence in the world today. You were kind enough to invite me to an event this week. A lot of things came up, but what's on your radar right now?
Well, the end of the global rules-based trading system, it's over, and we have no idea what's going to come next. And so there's just so much uncertainty out there now. And so a lot of CEOs and others are saying things are changing so fast, I'm just not going to pay attention. I can't keep up. This is why I don't sleep, right? Because I can't try. It's my job to keep up with everything, and I'm having a tough time keeping up with everything. And I'm not running, a major company in the region. And so some people are now starting to. It's just so much you don't know what to do, or you're not thinking through the second order effects, the third order effects, the fourth order effects, and literally, I'm trying not to be too time specific to today, but we now see what we've always been saying, like Trump is taking all of these actions, and countries are going to retaliate, and they hadn't been yet. And now, we see China retaliating to Trump. Now, Trump is saying he's retaliating for what China's been doing for the last 15 or 20 years. That's accurate. So now you had China take its actions. Trump is taking his actions. China is now counter-retaliating. Trump is now counter-retaliating to the retaliation. And it's going to change the world. And so what's going to happen when China acts differently because of what the U.S. is doing in Southeast Asia? Are you prepared for that? So it's really thinking through the second, third, and fourth order effects and starting to prepare for them. So that's on the geopolitical side. That's one. And the climate crisis hasn't gone away. The
Yeah.
climate crisis is getting worse, and you've got to be thinking through the physical risks of the climate crisis and what are you doing now to prepare for a world that is going to be much hotter and wetter and drier and fierier, if that's a word,
Yeah.
5 years from now.
It's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. It's, I was using this analogy the other day. When you see young people smoking, it's because they think they're going to live forever, and it's the same with our planet, and no one's really thinking about it beyond. It's very, very scary.
Yeah. I would say, and the last one is AI.
Yeah.
I am completely frightened by what AI is going to do to the workforce.
Steve, I had a skit with my guys in the office the other day. It's like you're meeting someone for the first time and you type into ChatGPT, how should I introduce myself? Okay. Oh, hi, how are you? And then the other, it's bananas. And we've seen it in the movies. We've seen it in the Terminator. It's exciting, but it's scary.
It's scary. And a lot of the positive people say, oh, well, everyone said, oh, the telegraph is going to kill jobs, and it didn't. The telephone's going to kill jobs, and it didn't. An email's going to kill jobs, and it didn't. If anything, they all made us more productive. I said, yeah, those things didn't have an IQ of 170 or 200.
Yeah.
This is something that world has never dealt with. I mean, I've talked to friends of mine who run companies, and I say, what's your prediction? And, they say, we're going to have 20% fewer jobs.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean we're going to fire 20% of the people we have today, but if we are planning on having 10,000 jobs, it's going to be 8,000. If we are having 1,000, it's going to be 800. Well, where are those people going to work? And what are those people going to do when they don't have work? And, we see protests in Indonesia and in Nepal. I think this is just the beginning. And so you really have to be thinking through this. And look, the Singapore government I don't think most other governments are thinking through what they're going to do to protect their especially their younger citizens.
It's really tough. I mean, when you look around the corner, the future, if you think about our grandkids, they might be going on dates with robots. But all joking aside, that's why I think sports is here to stay. But even music now, 50 Cent yesterday put out an AI song linked to one of his rap songs. You can't really tell the difference. Yeah. Right? That's really terrifying in my mind. Being based in Asia, you've lived in Australia. US.
No, I never lived in Australia.
You never lived, just you were here the whole time.
23 years here in the US.
So what's your worldview when you look at things now? Because what I find is quite often when I speak to, I lived in the US for quite a while. When I speak to people in the US, that even if they've got companies here, they still think predominantly from the US looking out. And then when I speak to people in Asia, the reality is most of us are working with international firms. We have a global view. And the two are very, very different. What's your take?
No, I think, before I moved here, I would have said, pre-Trump, of course. Before I moved here, I said the U.S. is the world's greatest country. Full stop. Now, you would say I still think we can be. We aren't right now, but we can be the world's greatest country. We should be the world's greatest country, but we're not perfect. We've been blessed with a lot of different reasons we have that capability to help set the world's rules in a way that benefits everybody. We're not perfect. We've done a lot of bad things, both internally and externally, but we've lost that right now. Although there's times we can still do it, and I hope we get it back. But I didn't recognize that. The rest of the world's a great place too, and there's a lot of things we can learn about from the rest of the world. And there's a lot of things that we can pick up from governments and people that I certainly didn't appreciate as an American, and that I do now. And I had a friend of mine, when I first moved here, and his advice to me, was because it's nice to be bilingual. If you can be bilingual, that's nice. But what's much more important is to be multicultural. Can you speak to somebody who's Chinese, who's Indian, who's Thai, who's Singaporean, and understand what their perspective is and what is that drives them, and that you can then be that person who fits in with them. And you could fit in India, and fit in China, and fit in Thailand, fit in Singapore, fit in the U.S. And having that worldview, being able to be multicultural, is really important. I think I'm okay at it. I don't think I'm perfect at it, but And I probably slip into being the American sometimes. But I recognize it, and I try to do that. And I think that I've changed completely from the time I got here till now.
My observation is, I mean, Singapore it's evolved so rapidly. I mean, the world has in the last 20 years. But when I first moved here in '01, after about 7 or 8 years, and it took me that long, I learned that yes, yes, yes was often no. Mm-hmm. Right. And then my job then in Singapore was to bring the no's forward. In Hong Kong, I've always said it's very different. You'll know it's a no because you're getting kicked out of the office. The thing that I love about the US, and I want you to speak on this because I grew up in the UK. I'm half Irish, half Chinese, Singaporean. The US, it's about winning and trying your best. And if you see someone else, if I see you across the street and Steve's doing, I say, wow, fair play to Steve. He's cracking on. Let me try and do that. In the UK, what I always felt, which is slowly changing, was that's not the case. I'd look at you and say, oh, that guy's doing, and I'd probably key your car. That was the psychology. That's why I think the US is such an amazing place, because there's that can-do attitude. Is that what you still think?
Yeah, I mean, sure. With Americans, I mean, I think that is very much still there. I mean, I think that's part of our ethos in what we've always believed about ourselves, and I think there are certainly positives there. There's sometimes you have to change. I remember one of the first times I went to Japan, representing UPS, doing an aviation negotiation, and it was meeting with a pretty senior Japanese official, and we did small talk for about 2 minutes or so, and I'm like, okay, well, here's why I think we should be working together, and here's where I think UPS can really help you. And he looks at me and goes, very American, because this was supposed to be an hour of small talk, but I'm not doing an hour. I mean, that's just not who we are and who I am.
Fast forward.
So it's a little, so some of it you keep, and then he's like, okay, let's do that. We'll play it the American way. But you do have to understand, play to your strengths, but understand where you fit in. And I mean, I think that I've been able to do that, and a lot of the writing that I get to do here or going on television here for CNA or the Straits Times or Business Times and whatever it may be, is that I'm an American who understands Singapore and can explain America to Singapore in a way that Singapore gets it. I mean, I think that's kind of the where I try and stay in my lane and do those types of things.
What do you think is going to happen to universities? Because when I look, I've got 3 kids, right? They'll be going to university. And what's crazy is maybe 20 years from now, maybe the whole institution's obsolete. And I'm just thinking that's the crazy thing. Like, you could drop out of uni now and maybe learn more online than you could do being in the university for 3 or 4 years. I still want my kids to go to university. I'm just curious, what's your observation?
No, well, I take the a very American view, which is different, and and a lot of, and if you can afford it, of course, right, going to college, I mean, that's about growing up. I mean, it's not about learning, and it's part of it, of course, is learning, but it's being in a club, being in a fraternity, being in a sorority, being part of the judiciary committee or the honor committee, or being on the student paper, or whatever it is, and it's how you're dealing with people. Now, if you're in a pretty elite school, obviously you're going to be dealing with people who are all very smart, and I mean. But that said, they're going to be from all different backgrounds. They're going to be from different states. They're going to be from different countries. Ideally, they're from different, economic levels. They're, different races, different everything. And that's what the value of it is. How do you work with people? How do you build those networks? And to me, that's really
very powerful.
It's the core part of the college experience.
I went to university in the UK and I didn't get any of that, and it was rubbish. And that's what I want for my kids. I want my kids to have that, because I think, you learn so much from that process. I've got some rapid fire questions I want to run past you.
Sure.
What's the first question you ask a client when you first meet them, or a prospective client?
Oh, I try and figure out, maybe if not asking them directly, why is it that we're meeting? I mean, why is it that you would want, what value can I bring to you? How can I help you make money? And if I got to try and figure that out, and if I can't answer that question, they probably don't want to hire me. And maybe they just want to, pick my brain and.
But you work that out fairly quickly, I guess.
Pretty quickly, I can figure out if this is now, is this something that's going to be serious and that we could actually have a client relationship? I have so many meetings that aren't about business, but that would be, if it's a client, how is it that I can help them make money? That's why you would hire somebody.
I love that. What's one of the toughest lessons that you've learned as a business owner?
Yeah, I don't know that I have, which is, because part of the certainly as a business owner, which is, what I've done now, my business is very unique because it's really, it's a platform approach, built on my career in government here.
Explain to the audience what you mean by platform approach.
Well, platform approach. I have 3 different email addresses and 4 different revenue streams. And so it's not out. I'm not out to make as much money as I possibly could. And maybe I couldn't make any more than I'm making now, but it's really what are the different things that I like doing that I enjoy that I can do, well enough at. And so, I think I know I could have gone in a different route. I could have gone back into a corporate world, but I've decided to go this way. Now, I now have, a woman, Noemi works for me. Works for me and with me full time, and so now we've doubled. And then I have a woman named Megan who's a senior advisor who's, really knows the sustainability piece.
You're the only business owner I've ever met that says no tough lessons. That's credit to you, man. I love it. Yeah. I could give you 100.
But it's different, and maybe I will get tough lessons as I expand out a bit. But I hate to say, I
love that, but that's also because you've got a unique brand, and what you do is so different. What is one underestimated skill, in leadership and has been a business owner again? Could you speak to?
No, I think understanding your uniqueness and really playing to that strength, staying in your lane. Yeah. And I think if you do those things, that's where you can, don't pretend you're what you're not. Don't say you're what you're not. The cliche, under promise and over deliver. But that definitely is something you try to do.
I think you're spot on, because I think the trust and the reputation that you build, it takes years to build that. And, we've all seen talented guys in school that only went so far. They're like a shooting star, and they come back down. And I think you have to keep working on that. And you're right, if you stay in your lane, that's not to say that you don't try new things like I've done, but I completely get that. What's the hardest part about advising leaders on geopolitics?
I think you need to understand where they're coming from. You need to, so it's really, understanding their perspective, understanding what is it that they need, and then, being able to bring your unique experience, your unique perspective to them. Don't tell them how to run their business. Yeah. These are really successful, men and women. But if you can explain to them, this is what I'm seeing that you may not be seeing, then that's going to bring you value. So how are you, not smarter than they are, but how are you additive to
the way that you've just described that? Because I find a lot of people come wading in, they don't sugarcoat things, and then you're going to put someone's back up. But in the way that you've just described it, it's very complimentary, and you're adding value, hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
But what you just said there is a masterclass on how to deliver great information in the right way. But I'm telling you, a lot of people can't do it. They go wading in, and it creates problems. What's the single biggest blind spot that private equity firms probably have today on sustainability?
I think that they don't think it's material. They don't think that this is something that is about making money. They think it's additive, it's a nice to do. And so, again, if you say, you should have more women on your board, and you don't explain why, and then they just won't listen to you. So it's their blind spot is that they don't realize it's material, and the blind spot of the people who are working in sustainability or ESG is they don't know how the business operates. They don't know how the business makes money, and you have to be able to translate that. I'll go back to to my UPS days. So when I joined UPS out of the government, my boss, it was said to me and the others who joined out of government, you're going to go drive the package truck, for a couple of months. And you're going to be out there delivering packages because you need to know how we make money. Yeah. Because only when you know how we make money that's when you are going to be able to advocate for what it is that we need.
I love it.
And why we need it. I had other bosses who, said, you got to get your hands dirty. You know, you have to really dig into this issue. You have to do the research. You have to talk to people before you know it. And so that's the blind spot of those who are trying to help the deal teams, the private equity, is they don't know how the business makes money. And so that's always one of the first questions I ask if I'm going to start a new project is, how do you guys make money? And then I can help them. If I don't know how they make money, then my advice is going to could be very well off.
You've got to understand granularly what the business does.
Yeah.
I think a lot of companies look at ESG and sustainability as a theme. It's something they flirt with because they feel it's in vogue. But no one's really talking about it in the way that you are, where they're nuts and bolts, and it can mean something. When you think about ESG sustainability in terms of investment themes, and for example, banks, what could they be thinking a little bit about? How to create a framework around this?
Well, a couple different things. But if you're thinking about an investment theme on responsible investing, you want to ask yourself, okay, what are the societal challenges that we're facing, and how can a business answer those societal challenges? How can we have an impact on those societal challenges? And so that is how you can come up with an investment theme. I mean, one of the ones that KKR came up with, years ago was there wasn't really safe and healthy drinking milk in China. There had been the melamine scandal, and people weren't trusting the milk. And if KKR said, well, if we can invest behind a business that is going to provide safe and healthy drinking milk, then people are going to want to buy that milk. And so there are ways that you have to make sure the supply chain is secure. You have to make sure people can't dump melamine into the milk to trick the tests. You need to make sure that you're using fewer cows if possible, and you're making them more productive because that lowers emissions and lowers feed costs. So all of that goes into it. But the investment theme there was you saw a societal challenge. There was no safe drinking milk, or not enough safe drinking milk in China. How do we address it? There's a lot of those in the climate world right now, which is why now nuclear energy is making a comeback, because that is a solution to a societal challenge, is that we don't have enough power. We don't have enough renewable power, especially with AI coming in that is going to suck up so much energy.
Yes.
And so nuclear is now a investment theme. And so you get behind that. So that's how you create those themes from having that ESG mentality. What are the societal challenges? How do we address them? And how do we address them in the way that minimizes the impact on the environment or workers and customers and the like?
I love that. What geopolitical risks are most CEOs not paying enough attention to today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is the second and third and fourth order effects of Trump 2.0. And just because Donald Trump says something, it doesn't make it wrong. I mean, Donald Trump is correct on certain things, and his instincts are in the right direction, I think, on China and trade between the U.S. and China, and what are the trade rules. His instincts are correct that for too long the United States really provided global security, and we paid for everything, and other countries didn't spend enough on defense, and that's changing now. You could say that the United States wasn't tough enough in certain ways on Israel and on others in the Middle East, and maybe now that we have this 20-point peace plan in Gaza, something will happen. So you can argue that Trump has certain instincts that are correct, but the way he's executing on a lot of them is not correct. And we're going to start seeing those second, third, and fourth order effects. And people aren't taking that into account yet. What is Southeast Asia going to look like when it has all sorts of new competitors because the U.S. market is not open to them as it had been before, and not open to others?
So interesting. What do you think is one of the biggest myths about doing business in Asia?
Well, it certainly used to be. I don't know if so much anymore, but when I would come out, people would be like, oh, I'm American or I'm European and we've been doing this forever and it's just starting up in Asia and it's going to be easy and, we'll just take what we learned in the US and the EU or Australia and we'll apply it here and we'll make a lot of money. Nah, I mean, that's not right. And I don't think people recognized that this is a very different market, and just because it's a global best practice isn't going to work here. And then also the complexity of the market, and even like China. If you think that China from a government affairs perspective. Well, China's like the U.S. and Beijing is Washington and Shanghai is New York.
Yeah.
You're completely wrong because every province has much more power in China than the states do in the U.S. So you're going to make that mistake if you're in China. And and here, like having an ASEAN strategy is kind of ridiculous. You need a Vietnam strategy and a Malaysia strategy and an Indonesia strategy and a Singapore strategy because there isn't an integrated market here. So it is a lot more difficult to have that approach.
So many nuances and
regulations and laws and governments and it's all very different. So this is a very difficult place, and you can't just take the EU or US mentality and plop it here. I don't think people do that as much anymore, but certainly I think that was the case, a couple decades ago.
well, we're seeing the rise of Asia and double-digit growth. Everything moves very quickly here. It's unless you've lived in Asia, you can't really grasp it. Yeah. Let's do some personal ones. So, what's perhaps one of the biggest, most influential books that you've ever read?
I knew you were going to ask me that question. God, I hate to say I don't have one, because I have a lot of influences, but it's been more people. I get the influence.
Give me top 2 or 3 influences in on your life or your career.
I've been so fortunate, and I try and do this. The people who I have worked for have been mentors to me, and they were consciously trying to be mentors to me. I mean, go back to college, and Professor Sabato, Larry Sabato at the University of Virginia, remains a mentor of mine. In government, the 2 general counsels I worked for at DOT, who was the deputy to, Steve Kaplan and Nancy McFadden. I mean, they were very much mentors to me. I mean, they were teachers more teachers than bosses. I mean, we're partners and to them, and going to the law firm I worked at in Washington, and to being at public affairs in UPS, Ken Melman, who created public affairs for KKR. All of them were mentors in ways, and I learned a lot from them. And so that's where I had my learning, much more than books.
No, I love that, and good on you for shouting out those guys, because people often overlook their bosses and the journey that they play. Talk to me a little bit about some of your personal values in business, because you've been here for a long time, so have I. I think your integrity, your reputation, speak on that.
I don't think it's hard. I mean, you know what the right thing is, right? And do the, what that is. And
I've met a lot of morons in business. I've got a no dickhead policy. I'll be very candid with you. Yeah. But unfortunately, in business, you do come across them. But I think there are some good people.
I think they're mostly good people. But I mean, and the other thing is, be honest. And I would, when, me and back my, still a very good friend of mine, Alan Turley at FedEx. I mean, UPS and FedEx, were very much competitors with one another. But Alan and I know you don't compete on government affairs. No. If you go, when you go into China, you're opening up China for UPS and FedEx. Yes. Now go let the business people compete with one another once you open up that market.
At that point.
And Alan and I always had this we'd say we will always be 100% honest with one another. And if I were going to say, to Alan, I'm not going to work with you on this, I would tell him up front, look, I'm not going to work with you on this. This is one I got to do on my own. And he'd be, great, you told me, go do whatever you want to do, and you can say whatever you want about me, but we're going to work together the 95% of the other time. So we'd be very upfront and honest with one another, always. Never try to hide anything who is, somebody who you were going to work with in the past. So I think, be honest. And, I, even had a story when I was at KKR, and Henry Kravis was coming to Hong Kong, and I was setting up a media roundtable for Henry, who's, this is one of the OGs, right, of private equity. And a friend of mine who was at Reuters, called and said, hey, can I get a one-on-one with Henry? And I said, no. I said, we have no time. We're doing the roundtable, but not doing any one-on-ones. And he said, thank you. And I'm like, okay, why? He said, because everybody else would have said to me, let me think about it. Let me get back to you. And I knew the answer was no. The person knew the answer was no, but they didn't want to deliver me the no. So then I would go to my editor and say, well, we don't know if we're going to get a one-on-one. And my editor would come to me every day, did you get a word back from KKR? And he said, well, no, I haven't heard back yet. And my life would be miserable. But because you were honest with me and told me no up front, Now I can get on with the rest of my life, and my editor won't annoy me. And so it's just be honest, right?
Yeah,
and deliver the good news. Obviously, that's great and easy. But deliver the bad news too, and that's that's all you want.
Steve, I really appreciate you taking the time. You're very generous, and I've been following your career on LinkedIn. The funny thing is, I just didn't know how you were connected to Glenn and Neil. I don't know how I missed that, but that's the funny thing about LinkedIn and what you see. And nowadays, if you're well networked, the feed is just, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is one of the things that I have really focused on that has been very helpful. Is LinkedIn, and I really try and when I post on LinkedIn, which is now literally 2 or 3 times a day because of all the...
Is it that many?
The deluge of news that's coming. I mean, I wake up this morning and, got 100% tariffs from Trump on China, and then, did radio. So now I got to post a story out of radio, and I got an interview with the South China Morning Post that maybe I'll be in their story, and I'll probably post that. It's crazy how much news there is right now in my world. But I try and be substantive and say, okay, here's a point that I put out. All right, some people might think I'm being a little self-promotional, and I'm not going to argue with them. But I try and be substantive while I'm being at least self-promotional.
That's what we have to do.
Yeah.
If just one last thing, because I am curious, because a lot of the people that come to you and I, they ask about advice, and not just for them, sometimes for their children as they're growing up. What piece of advice would you give to your younger self, coming out of university?
Well, I mean, what I've learned looking back on what I did accidentally was, the advice I give is make yourself unique. Yeah. Right? The more unique you are, the more opportunity you'll get. My career that I had is not replicable now because there's just no way they're sending somebody to Asia who never had been to Asia, literally, but maybe once or twice, to become the Asia expert. So you can't do what I did. I mean, I got the right place at the right time, but I put myself in the right place at the right time. I recognize that. Yes. But it's you got to make yourself unique, and you've got to take chances. So I would say bet on yourself. And looking back, I can't argue with where I am, but my view was, okay, I have to go to college and I have to go to law school. I got to go work in a law firm. And I did all that. And I would have rather, in looking back now, and certainly my younger son who's working in Fiji, right, is getting this advice. Go do something you'll never do again. Yeah, when you're young and you've got, you got no bills, you got no responsibilities.
Is he on the main island?
Yeah, he's in Suva. He's in the capital, working for AmCham Fiji. So he's doing that for 5 months.
Yeah,
and then he'll go do something. Exactly.
Have you gone to see him there yet?
I saw him once, and we're gonna go. I'll meet him again one more time, and I give speeches when I go there, so do a little bit of work, but get a chance to see what he's doing. But yeah, get those, experiences is what matters, and get those experiences, and don't worry about money. If you're worried about money, all right, go into the money business, and that's going to be your life. But if the money will come eventually if that's what you want. But get those experiences while you're young. I got really lucky because I was working on a presidential campaign, right out of high school, right out of law school, and I was working, on conventions while I was in college. So I was doing that a bit, but I think I could have done a lot more.
Steve, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's been great.
I've enjoyed the chat.
Me too, Paul.
Cheers.